once we get stable coins into scale in a very low cost, we can actually bring a lot of new monetization and value exchange mechanisms that could be used online.
Okay, perfect. So hi, everybody. Today, I'm very excited. We have on a very special guest. We have Stani. Stani is the co-founder of Aave, and Stani and the team is also behind Lens Protocol, which is one of the most popular Web3 social media protocols. So we definitely have a lot to get into today. And I actually missed like DeFi summer when Aave first started out. And I know it started out as like ETHLend back in the beginning, but I was there to see like how the Lens ecosystem developed. And that's been like really impressive to see and also like really fun to be a part of. So I'm very glad that I saw that like full grind from the scratch with Lens, although I wasn't there for the Aave beginning. And yeah, like since starting, you've been constantly shipping and kind of building new stuff, which is something I admire a lot. So yeah, first off, welcome, Stani. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Eda, and thank you, Austin, for having me here. It feels really good of talking to the builder audience and sharing my kind of experience over the years. And indeed, it's been quite a long time since I stumbled upon into the whole Ethereum dark forest and went from there.
Yes, it really seems like it kind of sucks you in and like you're an Ethereum person.
Then you don't have any choice anymore.
Exactly. You just kind of got to get going. So most people know you already, but could you like give us like a short introduction about yourself and just like what you're working on? I'm basically asking for like a TLDR of 10 years if that's possible, but yeah, handing it over to you.
Yeah, I don't know where exactly to start, but I think it was roughly like seven something years ago when I basically was reading a lot about Ethereum and this idea of having a computer on a distributed system that you can create applications. And those applications obviously are programmable, but also they are running by themselves and can be immutable, and that kind of like attracted to me to think about like you actually can create software, deploy it, and it's going to run there as long as the whole network runs. And it was quite a mind-blowing idea to me, and I became very obsessed of thinking of different interesting use cases. And previously in my earlier days, I've built fintech applications, so finance was quite close to me. And back in the Web2, the 2.0 boom, I was heavily involved in the Ruby and Rails community and was building more web apps and kind of like a social media applications as well at that time. So I kind of saw like this blockchain-based like a computer bringing a lot of opportunities. And it was 2016 when I saw ETHLend, which was like a first decentralized exchange that you didn't really as a user give your funds to any third party. You just put them on a smart contract and you have the full control, and you can place orders, exchange value. And that for me was like a really fascinating concept. And I was thinking that if you can trade on the blockchain, maybe you can do other things like borrow against your cryptographic assets and earn interest income as well. And that's where basically the idea of ETHLend, short for Ethereum lending, was born in 2016, and 2017 we built it, and later what became transformed into Aave protocol and grew over the years, especially during the times of DeFi summer where everyone was locked during COVID and looking for like what to do. And obviously DeFi got a lot of traction from people just sitting and moving their funds around these magical protocols.
Was Chainlink doing price oracles the catalyst for ETHLend?
even before Chainlink, we used this oracle called Oracleize, and
Oh yeah.
it was more of like a push oracle model. So effectively, you update the price feed, and it's going to be valid for at that time it was like for 1 hour, something that is really not acceptable anymore. But you basically push the price as a user yourself, and once you get the price on chain, you basically either can liquidate and claim a collateral, or you can't. And then I think that wasn't really a scalable model. So when Chainlink's kind of sorry, that was like a pull model. So Chainlink's like a push model where you consistently had a pulse of a data going to smart contracts, really made these lending protocols more scalable. And the reason we had this kind of like pull model in the beginning was that updating Oracle for 20, 30 users that were in DeFi at that time wasn't really like feasible for every 5 or 15 even minutes. So we wanted the users to do that for themselves. So obviously, like the Chainlink model then became more scalable with Aave.
That's what I just remember ETHLend. I think you and I were both at ETH London in 2019, which was a really, really good hackathon. The vibes at ETH London were amazing. And I remember you had an ETHLend booth. And I remember at the end of it, I saw you from kind of across the room, and you came up and just gave me a big hug of exhaustion after that 2019 ETH London. What a cool time that was to be around, and ETHLend kicking off. I don't even know if I have a real question there, but maybe the question is like, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was like thinking that hackathon was really cool because I think it was the time when we were pitching to Cardigan ETH Global team that would be really cool to have a hackathon in London, and I think there's sort of potential, a lot of builders, and ETH Global in general. A lot of these hackathons, like in Denver, they're just doing like amazing work on actually getting local developers to build, and also obviously developers that want to travel and build as well. And I think it just showcases like the amount of people coming into the space outside of kind of a crypto by just building. And I think whole ecosystem was quite builder focused in those early days. So pretty much everyone you met came from some sort of like a builder background or excitement on the technology. And I do miss those days quite a lot.
Me too.
So it's actually a nice segue, because like Aave has also been around for quite some time, and I know like you have a new proposal on like some new changes as well. But can you talk about like how you see like Aave and like how DeFi is evolving, and what kind of things you're working on right now?
Yeah, I think like DeFi has had its moment for a few times, and I do think DeFi is really proven itself to be quite a substantial use case on chain, and it's becoming like a fundamental use case. So obviously, blockchain is great for securing and exchanging value. So anything that creates programmable value, programmable applications, and these protocols, they do have a place on chain. And obviously, it has a lot of advantages compared to traditional finance, like paper-based finance, or just the financial infrastructure and the products we use today. So what is interesting about DeFi is that some of these DeFi protocols are becoming substantially incurring with revenue, meaning that they generate revenue to these decentralized organizations. Aave DAO is a great example where it generates revenue. Part of that revenue goes to paying to different service providers. And the way it works, for example, is that anyone can become a contributor to the Aave DAO by building, or by just getting a proposal of, hey, I want to build this interesting cool thing. Can I get a grant, or can I build this? Can I improve the existing protocol? Can I do some governance work, or treasury management, or a security auditor can actually engage that way. So it's a truly open system where anyone can come, pitch, and get their idea backed if it's feasible and if it's really valuable for the DAO. So that's really interesting. So now the DAO basically gets revenue, pays these service providers, and it's a very decentralized system from that perspective. And the underlying kind of protocol itself is a fundamentally working system. So it's in a place where I haven't expected Aave or DeFi to grow. And at the same time, I think it's going to take a decade for DeFi to grow more towards mainstream, because finance is such a fragile infrastructure, and you want to have something really, really mature before it gets adoption or gets institutional attention as well. So I do think that gaming, social, all these other like non-financial use cases will get more faster traction. But fundamentally, DeFi is something that is needed almost in every layer or ecosystem to some extent, and it's going to take more time. My personal work with from Aave Labs, which is part of Avara, and obviously Avara is basically a company behind of Aave Labs, Lens Labs, and Family Wallet that we recently acquired. And from the Aave Labs, what I'm personally working now with our team is to actually build the new version of Aave, the version 4. And it's part of this bigger Aave 2030 proposal where we recognize that the community has to be very forward-looking and build and innovate to get to the kind of like a next step of adoption. So that's where my work is now and focus with the Aave ecosystem. And just to mention that Aave Labs is just one small contributor amongst other contributors in the DAO and the whole ecosystem.
That was actually like a very, very nice question, like follow-up question I had on that is, especially coming from like a very traditional like Web2 background, I think it's kind of hard to understand. Okay, there's like the Aave protocol, and then there's like the DAO, which like governs the protocol, like gets proposals, and then there are like the core contributors inside these companies. Can you talk a bit about like, so am I having it correctly?
Yeah, exactly. So a good example will be that, let's say there is email protocol that manages the messaging between all the email clients. And there's a team that builds the email protocol, and also they build, let's say, a one email client. So they basically contribute to one existing client, and also periodically they contribute to the email protocol. But there's other people also contributing to improve the existing protocol, and then also other teams that are building their own clients. So a protocol is kind of like a shared infrastructure or like a shared public good, which doesn't belong to one entity. And in fact, everyone can come in and contribute. And it's not really a new thing. It's part of the open source culture. So when you look at something like Linux, there's, for example, vision, what Linus Torvalds thinks about how Linux could evolve, but there's plenty of other types of visions there. And at the same time, because it's an open source community, everyone can choose who they want to work with and what kind of topics they want to work with, and apply for grants and contribute. And open source is really successful. If you think about something like Linux, over 99% of the servers around the world are using Linux. And it's also like a better way to create more neutral software that is basically flexible, but also neutral in the standpoint that you want to be as unopinionated as possible to cover wide range of use cases, and then you can build the opinionated layer more on top of that infrastructure as a product, basically.
So it's kind of like the protocol is like the rule set, And then you want to have lots of players playing by that rule set to create that level of decentralization. But then there's probably fees or something making the protocol more expansive, and those fees end up going to a DAO, and then the DAO can, send those funds out to lots of different people who are nourishing that ecosystem in lots of different ways. The idea of open source incentives is so like, it's such a, this is where Ethereum will be successful. And it's, I imagine, package.jsons with Ethereum addresses in them, or some new kind of like readme dot or license dot, but this is contributors dot or something like that, where there's Ethereum addresses natively within the repos of all these different downstream dependencies. I think Drips is kind of working on that, but just when you start to see that possibility, it gets so exciting. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, that's exactly really cool, because like end of the day, the value that Web3 can actually give is, I mean, open source exists regardless of Web3, but the value there could be that being able to create a more fair contributor environment where you can calculate and see that, what are these different contributions and how they could actually get rewarded and incentivize that type of system. I think, for example, optimism retroactive funding is one example. Gitcoin grants is another example of basically trying different kinds of models and trying to figure out like how we create a incentive structure where people can actually focus on working on interesting problems and being incentivized without the need of thinking for and grabbing short-term incentives over something that could be beneficial long-term, because there's plenty of people that are anyways going to work on short-term incentives versus something that is going to actually be a more long-term project and actually beneficial over long-term. And I think that's where crypto economics and these on-chain incentives can be very helpful on organizing work towards what really matters after years from now.
The Build Guild DAO is kind of grappling with this problem where we've tried to incentivize folks to make prototypes, and we've almost created a DAO of mercenaries instead of a DAO of missionaries. And there's this really weird thing. You're talking about a DAO trying to fund groups, and if what we're saying is the DAO needs to create these games or these incentives in a way that kind of leads to the behaviors that we want. And the best possible way for a DAO is to find those really good people, like to reach out to them. But that just doesn't scale. We need a system where people are coming to us and following these incentives. So it's something we're still like grappling with also, even as a small developer DAO. How do we get more of these like missionary types that will like own products and think about the long term of these products rather than, I can get an incentive this week for doing this little thing. More like I wanted to plant a thing and nourish it over a 9-month period to make something much bigger and have more impact.
Yeah, and also another thing about these DAOs that is always challenging is that every DAO has its own culture. And something that always kind of like fascinates me is that how, as a group of people, that everyone has, for example, their own incentives to build. Like if you look at the Aave DAO, you have all these different developers, you have people who manage security or treasury, and everyone kind of has their own incentives, and how to actually grab the vision towards like a long term and how to focus on something that is bigger over long term and then coordinate with all the contributors. So it is a kind of like a hard battle between short-term incentives and long-term incentives. What really matters, not necessarily today, but over the years to come. And I think if the more we get this kind of like a mindset in crypto in general of what we have to do to make this successful ecosystem over the years, it's going to be like the projects that are going to get funded and the work that is being done and the interest of solving problems will look completely different. And there are people that are here for the long-term vision, and they kind of understand that some of these problems and topics has to be worked early upon, and it takes years to solve. And Ethereum is, for example, almost like a decade old, or is it already more than a decade actually? But it's still kind of like a middle of its journey and not really fully there yet. So that's something where these incentives could actually help in organizing work for long-term benefits.
And we see people play to the incentives all the time too, right? Like as soon as the Gitcoin system was created, we see all these people playing to the game. And if you want to raise funds on Gitcoin, you basically have to be a one-man marketing shop along with being a dev shop. And it's just really tough. So we need to figure out how to make these incentives work, even for folks that don't want to play the game but can build cool things. Let's change gears a little bit. You talked about DeFi being this like obvious thing, but then there's gaming and social and all of this other stuff that seems to be, maybe this will be the catalyst that brings in more users at first, and DeFi will always be kind of an important thing that we use with decentralization, but not the main case or not the main draw. So that leads me to social, obviously, and kind of you guys have done a lot with Lens, and you've made some small design choices different than Farcaster, and Farcaster is picking up steam now too. How, from a standpoint of wanting Lens to be successful, how do you see the Farcaster stuff, and do you see maybe those protocols working together? Are they separate? Where do you see the future going with Web3 social with respect to Lens and Farcaster?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I do think that there might be more people that are interested in building non-financial applications compared to financial applications. So from kind of like a builder perspective, working on and building on decentralized social is really exciting. And from Lens perspective, we want to make it as composable and easy as possible. And obviously from architectural standpoint, we rely on this idea of on-chain being the way to actually enable data integrity. And what that means that, for example, when we compare to federated models, as an example, for example, AP protocol, which Blue Sky relies upon, or for example, ActivityPub, which Mastodon relies upon, and I think Farcaster has the federated model on the followers and also on the messaging side, which is essentially content. So the way we see it is that the reason we can't really use on-chain very widely in the same kind of like a transactioning volume as we have in social media is because we don't have that scalability. In the past, we didn't have that scalability available. And just going back in a couple of years, the only thing that was available for little bit scale, not mainstream scale, has been, for example, Polygon, and more recently, year and a half, rollups has been one solution of scaling in Ethereum, optimistic rollups and ZK rollups. And I think ZK rollups specifically are interesting because you don't need the same amount of data that you might need on optimistic rollups to recreate the state, for example, for fraud proofing. And ZK rollups kind of have a little bit of edge on the compression techniques. But with the rollups, even in the current designs of, let's say, Lens or Farcaster, it's going to be very costly to scale. And on Lens, the on-chain is used for the identity piece, so profiles, handles, and the follow graph. And the follow graph is specifically important to have on-chain because that verifies actually your ownership with the audience. And the way I think about on-chain is that when I was talking about the data integrity, it means that there is a set of computers that can actually establish a consensus because of these cryptoeconomics of what is accurate data. And once you have that, you basically have censorship resistance. And censorship resistance, I'm referring not specifically moderation perspective, but from the perspective of data integrity. So if you have a system where you can trust that you can own the data, let's say it's balances accounts of your financial assets or your ownership of, let's say, your profile or your audience, that basically creates actually a system where you don't need to necessarily trust, and creates the ownership. And then you can build interesting primitives there. And the challenge with federated models is that you don't have this data consensus, which means that these servers can grow very big. And once they grow substantially, what happens is that you can incentivize them you can pay incentives to federated servers, but that's kind of like a payment for uptime, SLAs, effectively. But there's no kind of like a economical guarantee or mathematical guarantee of that every server will have the same data. So in social networking context, it means that effectively, if someone goes to a federated server and says that you need to take some of the content down, or you need to shut down the server, and if there's like a court order, that basically will happen. Like there's not much you can do because you control the system, your server. But in a blockchain-based model, because you have this data integrity in the consensus, it means that if one server leaves, there's going to be high enough incentive for another server to come and replicate the data structure. And this is the reason why finance works really well on chain, on blockchain, and why anything that needs to have an ownership piece as well could work pretty well. And the reason that the scale isn't here is that we're using too much of that blockchain security on social transactions. So social transactions aren't the same as financial transactions, meaning that you maybe need on-chain security, but maybe you need only fraction of that. And I think the way to think about social scaling and also gaming is to use something where you're using Ethereum as a basis for these transactions, but then you have something else for the data availability and where you store your state. And then you get your costs significantly down. And I think a good example of that is Validium. And that's something, for example, Vitalik talks quite a lot about as a scaling solution for price-sensitive transactions and transactions that don't need the same security as financial transactions. And then you can get that mass kind of like a mainstream scale. I hope that wasn't too difficult to explain.
I think that's a very nice there are like different models on building like the different applications too. But I kind of want to talk a bit more about the Web3 social, like not specifically the design choices, because yes, I totally agree with the fact that most people are interested in like building non-financial applications, maybe because it's more fun, maybe it's because like it's less risky. Also just, again, people like to make games and have fun online. So I see like a lot of benefits of Web3 social as a developer, as like why I would go ahead and like use Lens or Farcaster or any kind of open source toolkit, because it's very composable. As you mentioned, like there is the censorship resistance piece, but so Twitter or like Facebook can't come and like remove it. But more so, I think it's composable. So like you can build different things together. But I want to hear like ask more about like the user side. So I'm like a user of Twitter, and I'm also both on like Lens and Farcaster, and I've been working with most. But like originally, I do spend most of my time on Twitter because it's I have my following there, I have my followers there. It's I'm looking to understand like what do you see are the incentives of like someone being like, okay, I'm going to leave Twitter and now I'm going to be on like Web3 social. Like, what's the missing pieces over there?
I mean, I do think you can acquire some amount of users from like existing social media platforms, but I do think it's going to be minimal. I think what's going to be really game changing is new types of social experiences for even new audiences or even younger audiences. So what I think about is that it's really hard to compete against something like Twitter because the network is really strong. It has grown over years and years and years. We all have followers there and audiences, and effectively with the new AI on Twitter, it's just going to get even harder to acquire users because they just get more targeted, better content. And Twitter is a little bit different from, for example, OpenAI or Google, because obviously Google gets a lot of real-time data, but Twitter gets real-time data of news and things that are happening right now. And a lot of people have done over the years searches when, if you hear something new, you don't necessarily go to Google, you go to Twitter to search what is this new thing. So it's just going to be harder and harder to actually get adoption from there. So I'm very bearish on the idea of trying to build like Web3 powered Twitter. Instead, I think what we need to do is to build new experiences that they can have familiarity, but they fulfill a different kind of purpose and experience. And from Lens perspective, what Lens is effectively social infrastructure. So Lens should just make it as easy as possible to people to take that risk and try to build. And one of the things I love about Lens is that it's a shared social network. So once there's users, for example, now there's 330,000 profiles, it means that those users aren't locked in a database, but it's available for anyone to come and build to that same user base. And the applications might, for example, succeed or fail, but every time it leaves more users into the ecosystem. And also it's an open database for computation of algorithms. So even data engineers can come and build new exciting algorithms that can be really exciting. I mean, TikTok showed quite well how a powerful algorithm can actually make the whole application. So I think we have to build new stuff. And I think that's where we're going to see more actual adoption outside of the crypto space.
I think, yeah, there's this really interesting thing where when we're thinking about decentralization and the adoption of decentralization, we all go to censorship resistance first. But really, like, that's not something that is a calling thing for someone to move. They only really need censorship resistance once they need it, right? I think we were joking off camera about when you were banned from Twitter because you said you were going to take over for Elon or something like that, right? How did that go? But you got banned and you were kicked out. And if it weren't for your vast network of people probably tagging you and tagging Twitter, that might have been like a long battle. And that's when you need censorship resistance, when you get kicked off of a thing. But then it's just you alone saying, damn, I wish I had censorship resistance. The thing that I think will win people over is not the censorship resistance, but probably the composability part. When my whole social graph is available for any developer to permissionlessly add things, then when I'm on Twitter and I have all these new followers and I'm like, man, I wish I could filter these followers by how many other people follow these followers. Just like a simple little mechanism I wish I could add, it would give me like great insight into who I should follow and who I shouldn't. There's just no way that I can do anything about it on Twitter. It's just there and I have to use their stuff. But if this is a Web3 social platform, that's something I could build in an afternoon that's then going to be very powerful for me, but then anybody else can use it too. So I think like these features of composability and other things other than censorship resistance is what's going to bring people in, and then maybe they stay for the censorship resistance or something like that. Am I dancing around a clear concept there?
And I think composability has been always something that brings people over. So when we look at, for example, DeFi, like the reason that DeFi exists is that censorship resistant, that you can build and program these applications and you kind of understand the the outcomes. So for example, when you supply liquidity into an AMM or into Aave, you kind of know that, you know, you can withdraw and you have these certain rules. But people obviously come for example, the idea of I can build something on top of here. It could be really useful. And I think we've, especially with early days of Aave, I've noticed that our time actually went, and my personal time went more of helping developers out to build something on Aave, from simple things like basically vaults that you can move liquidity between protocols and other things. So the actual composability part is really important in every ecosystem. And also I think the same has been happening in Lens, that people have been building these interesting tools. We've seen third-party algorithms being built as well. So they don't really need to be even on-chain type of composability. They can be just off-chain tools relying on this on-chain data. And then the kind of like a next thing, which will be really cool, is to see like DeFi, decentralized social, and other things that live on the same blockchain network, like actually come together, and people building these applications where you are using whatever components of these different categories. So the composability is really powerful element, and it really doesn't exist on the internet. Like you need, every time you want to integrate something, you need a API key, you need to contact the sales team, and like it's really hard to build on internet something really composable. And this is something I noticed when I was building fintech, is that when you try to get like you wanted to just create small proof of concept, you couldn't really do that because you needed like to contact the team, the salespeople, get an API key, sign a 1-year agreement to get some certain amount of tokens, and things aren't as easy. And I think this is just not a decentralized social thing. This is whole like Ethereum thing, that, you know, whatever you build, everything is accessible more or less on the same network, and these smart contracts basically talk to each other. That's like a really open internet idea.
So I'm going to shift the discussion a bit back to DeFi, and not to go DeFi, Web3 social DeFi, but because of the timeline of the releasing. But so basically, you now have a stablecoin that's governed by the Aave DAO called Go. And Go is, yes, I would like to know like the details about Go, but basically like my first experience with Go was actually through ETH Global's Go Hackathon, where we hacked together with like my friends, both Carlos and Shiv, and we built like a small application. And that was the first time I was like experimenting with both like Go and using stable coins. And so the first thing that always comes up is, okay, like what's the difference between Go and DAI? Can you just talk about like what makes Go like different than other stable coins, or is it like kind of similar but governed by the Aave DAO?
Yeah, I mean, one big kind of like innovation for Go is that when you supply your collaterals into the Aave protocol, obviously you don't need to create like one type of a collateral vault, like for example, Ethereum, and then another one, let's say the Aave token, and then mint Go against those different vaults. So you can basically bring any accepted assets that the DAO has approved on the Aave protocol, and you can earn interest at the same time on your collaterals while you're borrowing Go. So that's a significant difference, meaning that you can actually have that net interest rate difference. So you're earning on your collateral, you're borrowing Go, and your earnings are decreasing your borrowing costs. And for the DAO, why Go is quite interesting is that every stablecoin that is in the Aave protocol, the DAO collects roughly something like 10% reserve factor, meaning that all of the interest rates that are earned by the suppliers, 10% goes to the Aave DAO. In terms of Go, because there's no suppliers, all that interest rate goes actually to the Aave DAO, meaning then Aave DAO has more budget to fund developers, fund different kinds of activities like Raves and other hackathons as well. So yeah, and overall, it's basically helping the liquidity crunches within the Aave protocol itself.
I just wanted to show it off because it's really cool. This shows the permissionless extensibility, but this was like your hackathon project, Eda and Carlos. They just took Scaffold ETH off the shelf. They extended Go and they set it up so I think what happens is I lock up some collateral and then I stream the Go token to someone who's like working on a bounty or something like that. But this is just like a simple mechanism with the tooling and the protocols that we have, existing, that you are able to permissionlessly just build these things, and that's really neat. I think my video is messed up. Sorry, let me tinker around with that.
Yeah, that's really cool, and that's the thing. And I think what you built is quite amazing, and I think the streaming component is relatively it's really cool, because what I think also, like with scaling Ethereum, like obviously we're now on a roll-up scaling life cycle of scaling Ethereum, and the next step is basically adding things like validiums, and that enables very low cost payments. You can create interesting payment use cases where, for example, if you scroll a web page, every scroll deducts your wallet balance of Go. So what is interesting about the internet and the way we use monetization, as an example, you have a lot of products that are based on information, but they're behind of a paywall. And paywall is really kind of like an annoying way to monetize. Obviously, you find an interesting article, you go and try to read, and there's the paywall. And then you have to pay $7, and it says that you have to do 12 months minimum. Obviously, you lose the incentives, motivation there. And this is because the way, like, credit card works and the whole monetization has been planned, and lack of that design space. So if you can actually charge users by every less than a second, and even smaller amounts and frequently, and you don't incur high costs, you can really change the way we charge users on different kinds of whatever is consumed online. So that's why I think payments is going to be a really big thing, and Stripe has done, and a lot of these, PayPal as well, a lot of these payment processes has done extremely interesting work over the decades. But once we get stable coins into scale in a very low cost, we can actually bring a lot of new monetization and value exchange mechanisms that could be used online with as simple as that application as well. And I think that's the power of composability, and when we get into higher scale.
Yeah, micropayments for sure is like one of my main interests right now as well. And I feel like that's like, especially when we were building the application, it's like, wow, like you can use micropayments, super low cost, transfer anywhere. But I just want to kind of wrap up on like how Go works, because that was like really interesting to me. It seems like very innovative and different than other coins. So basically, just for anyone listening, and just to validate my understanding too, is that Go is not supplied, but instead when you're like, okay, I need Go, that's when you borrow Go with your tokens. And that can be like ETH, for example. In the app, we did it with ETH. You go ahead, you borrow Go at the price, and then when you pay it back, it's then like it's then sent back, or like I'm not sure, like
yeah.
Am I getting it correctly?
Yeah, and most of the Go, so normally when people are getting Go, they go to an exchange and they just buy. But that's the way you describe is effectively how Go is issued to the market. So there's always more collateral on Go of assets than there's Go minted out. So that creates this stability and the peg essentially. And Go is, I mean, it's still experimental, but we've used Go for example, paying for Aave tickets. So we have like a Go pass that we sold, and I think we sold over 300 Go passes, and they go like in a few seconds or a few minutes. It's just, it's kind of unbelievable, like how what you can do with stable coins. And I use stable coins quite frequently. And when you compare to like traditional banking, you know, if you send international payments or you paid, you know, bills and stuff, you never know whether that payment actually went through. But with stablecoins, you can go to a block explorer and you can see, you know, that there's finality there. I think it's just, it always feels to me weird to use TradFi or, you know, traditional payment mechanisms and kind of like understand that how outdated everything is compared to what we're doing here now in Web3.
This is definitely a podcast for builders. Let's pretend like, and we just showed off GHOFund. You can take Scaffold ETH or any tool. There's lots of tools in the space. Tools are all open source. You can fork these and have an app that works with Go or Lens in an hour or something like that. It's more about just like getting people over the educational boundary. Once they like learn and they understand a lot of things, there's also this, you have to teach them to stop asking permission. Like all of this is permissionless. All of this is open source. Like stop asking me for permission and just go build things. But I am going to ask you for permission a little bit here and say, where would you like to see developers tinkering? Everyone's always looking for the validation that they're in the right area or something like that. Knowing that all of this is open source, you can go build all this stuff permissionlessly. Still, what's your interest and where would you like to see developers hacking?
Well, we were talking about payments, and I do think like having new payment primitives is really fascinating, and especially kind of like low cost payments and trying out, spinning out some sort of ways to do payments in scale, and that is really interesting. And I think the science space is quite big there. On the decentralized social, I think algorithms is really interesting, and especially the kind of like connectivity with ML. Obviously, OpenAI is putting a lot of effort into their models, Google. But now, for example, there's also open source models available in Hugging Face. Llama 3, for example, is a really substantially good model. So just taking, for example, lens data and building some sort of interesting algorithm with open source ML models is super exciting. And you can actually do it with Python code and like very minimal work there. And something that I want to also like talk about a lot is the design aspect. So designing really nice interfaces, intuitive interfaces is really powerful as well. And I think that's a very big missing piece in our ecosystem, in crypto, having just like applications that are really delightful and great experience. So at least those areas are quite interesting. But to be honest, as you also said, that it's all about what you are interested in and excited and find fascinating to build. So my opinion is really not as important as what you really want to build and explore.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot there, even just like on-chain things. Like things are cheaper now. Things are getting cheaper and they're getting more accessible, and things that you wouldn't have put on chain 2 years ago, you can put on chain now, and it's cheaper. Like you can deploy a smart contract for a couple of pennies on some of these L2s or even cheaper on some of these L3s. And so that like opens up this whole new design space and use cases and all sorts of things. But then you said there, like, it needs to also be delightful and look nice. And that's so hard.
Yeah.
Like, it's so hard to find all of these different things and make it delightful and look nice. So that's just a product touch, right? That's the builder's touch.
Yeah.
And the designer, like those kind of things. You can tell when you use an app how much intention was put into it, both on the back and the front end.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome.
So I also feel like you gave the answer, like, especially like during hackathons and everything, I see a lot of people come up to you, of course, like to ask questions. So I feel like if they come up with like these kind of apps, it would be really helpful to move forward. But we are like on time. So I do want to say thank you so much for being with us today. We covered quite a lot, picked your brains a lot. But anything that you want to add, any closing remarks? Yeah, back to you.
Any hot takes? Yeah. Yeah, anything. Open mic now for Stani.
Well, yeah, I think fundamentals are underrated. So instead of going and deploying meme coins, building fundamentals is really good thing to do right now. So I definitely also encourage to look into DeFi quite a lot, because it's ever evolving space. And RWAs is also really exciting space as well. So yeah, these things are pretty cool. And as I mentioned earlier, from a developer standpoint, especially if you're new into space, I just recommend to, browse and explore and build things that like really find passion, and try to iterate and deploy and see code actually on mainnet. So that's my advice.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stani.